Alrighty, congrats everyone on making it through the second section of this class. We'll move into more about more information about volition now. We spent a good amount of time talking about things like goal setting, right? So having motivation to get to the top of the rock. Now we're going to talk more about some cognitive processes that we have, as well as some strategies that we can use to actually get there. So going about doing the behaviors and actually climbing that rock with this analogy. And so in this first video here, we'll just quickly make a distinction between motivation and volition, and then we'll talk about some of these goal-striving cognitive processes that we have. All right, so motivation, I think thus far we've been using the term motivation relatively broadly, and so want to specify this further for this third section, at least, in terms of motivation being the why we do something and being the goal setting. So motivation then is determined by what we expect to get out of a certain goal, right? What is that value at the end? What is it? What are the incentives? Is that important to us? The goal characteristics we talked about in the past. So that is motivation. Volition, on the other hand, what we're going to start talking about now is the actual striving for the goal. So goals produce some sort of a tension or an energy when there's discrepancy, or in other words, we haven't reached the goals yet. And so this energy then is what leads to goal striving. And then striving, on the other hand, will eventually, if we accomplish these goals, relieve that tension. So we've talked about tension systems a bit in the past, but with a little bit different terminology. So we talked about this in terms of goal dilemmas or conflicts. So we remember we talked about like approach goal conflicts, where you could either go to a concert that you really want to see or go to some sporting event of your favorite team. We also talked about avoid conflicts, where you either do laundry or take out the trash, two connected things where you have to do one of them, but you don't want to do either. But yeah, this sets up the tension that then leads to this goal striving. So yeah, the tension results in volitional processes that we're going to talk about. More modern term I would use for volitional processes would be self-regulation. And so I'll use both of these terms throughout the lectures here, but I am talking about the same thing, whether I use volitional processes or a self-regulation. There are many of these volitional processes, goal-striving processes that we engage in to accomplish a goal. There are 4 here, and I'll give an example of a study or something like that for each of these. But one of these processes, cognitive processes, is coming up with or identifying means to complete a certain goal. So what strategies can I use? If I'm hungry, my goal is to go and get some food. What can I do to go and get that food? We also, although we definitely all fail at this sometimes, we are, as humans, generally actually pretty good at avoiding distractions. So an example of that is just staying away from the TV until work is done, right? Additionally, ended the last section with, okay, this is all intentions, but we need the behavior too, right? So how do we go about getting started on things? If you have an intention to whatever your goal might be to get a degree, how do you go about the behaviors now? So now that you need to study, right? And then finally, we have gotten started now, but we can't always avoid these distractions or interruptions, right? And so actually we're cognitively set up pretty well to be interrupted. and come back and resume the task. So we'll talk about that. And so the overarching goal for this section is just go over cognitive processes that allow us to go about doing these things and to consistently do them relatively well. There we go. Alrighty, so you might recall we've talked about goal hierarchies a little bit in terms of how we can have goals that are more abstract versus goals that are more concrete, right? Like, okay, I want to go and get a drink of wine, or I want an alcoholic drink. Those are going to be relatively concrete. But those are going to be fulfilling more abstract goals, right? Of either maybe you're just thirsty and you want a drink, or you want to go enjoy a social gathering, and alcohol or whatever it might be you might think will help you have fun at this event. So yeah, more abstract goals that these concrete goals get at. And a couple just additional things to point out with these goal hierarchies, kind of involved in the overall tension systems that we're talking about here, is that multiple means can oftentimes get at accomplishing the same goal, right? So drinking wine or drinking a beer could both accomplish getting an alcoholic drink. Additionally, both an alcoholic drink and a non-alcoholic drink like water could get at this goal of thirst, although if it's just thirst, maybe one works better than the other, but still. And additionally, something else I want to add with these is that we can have competing goals. So we can have a goal of thirst, and also we can have a goal of hunger, but we have to pick one to go and act on, right? We likely can't do both at the same time. Now with thirst and hunger, this can be relatively close together, but still, when we pick one of these two goals, so say we go with the thirst, the idea is that we then inhibit hunger. So we're going to be less focused on foods and things that would accomplish this hunger goal, because at that point we're focused on thirst, and putting intentional resources towards hunger would be a waste of those resources in the moment. So once we stick with something, or once we pick something, we typically stick with that until we get at accomplishing that goal, and we inhibit other competing goals. Additionally, we can think about this as well in terms of when we think about abstract goals, right? Like thirst, hunger, farting, any of these abstract goals, this should facilitate the ease in which we can also come up with means to reach those goals, right? So when you think about partying, you're likely going to think about these more concrete things like drinking wine more frequently than if you weren't thinking about an abstract goal such as partying or thirst. All right, so identifying means in these goal hierarchies, right, is one of those initial processes that I brought up. And so this is a study that gets at that, and people were presented with various words, and these words were either related to the goal or not. So if they were, that's high goal facilitation. If they weren't, that's low goal facilitation. So right, drinking cola would get at thirst, so that's high goal facilitation. Eating chips would be more of a hunger thing, so that's low goal facilitation. If our goal is thirst, then we should inhibit this connection between thirst and eating chips, because that's not a means to an end there. Chips isn't going to help with that thirst goal. Additionally, what we see here with these different groups is whether or not people were committed to the goals, basically is what is meant by low or high goal tenacity. So high goal tenacity is high commitment towards this goal of finding something to drink so I'm not thirsty anymore. What they found was that those with the higher goal tenacity or higher goal commitment were quick to pair these words in the high goal facilitation, and slow, as we see here, we have reaction time on the y-axis, slow to pair words like thirst and chips, versus those who didn't really care about the goal. There just wasn't much of an effect here, right? Um, but yeah, the idea is that the means to this goal was being identified quickly for those who the goal was important to. And that was not the case for the low goal facilitation or the word that was not related to the goal. Additionally, somewhat similarly, we also see goal shielding here. So in this part of the study, they have either low or high substitutable words. So again, if the goal is thirst, right? Cola and water would both be means for this goal, as we talked about. There can be a couple of means to reach this goal versus the low substitutability, right? Cola and chips. Again, chips is hunger, cola is thirst. These are not substitutable because they don't both get at thirst. So what they found in this study was that in the high goal tenacity group, again, that's the same, when presented with words like cola, they were slow to react to words like water. And so this gets at the idea of goal shielding. So these are those really concrete goals, right? So when the word of cola is presented, then it's like, all right, this is it, stick with it. This is how I'm going to accomplish thirst. Now I have a goal of getting this cola. I'm inhibiting everything else. Versus with these low substitutability words, we don't see much shielding here. There's slow reaction time. There's just not much of an effect for, it's not much of an effect for the low goal tenacity group, and not much of a difference going on here at the low substitutability. So they were pretty quick to identify this word here as well. Low substitutability pairings. The idea is that goal shielding was not occurring here. So goal hierarchies in general clearly have quite a bit of relevance for volition and volitional processes. Basically what they do is they help identify the means to accomplish a goal. So they help us come up with like, okay, I can get cola and I can get water, and that will, both of these things will work for thirst. Additionally, though, once we have made our decision, once we have made the decision to get that cola, we are shielded from distractions. We make this choice and we stick with it. And that's called just overall goal shielding. Additionally, here, another process that was initially brought up is intention superiority. So basically, we are more likely to remember things that we must do versus things we have already accomplished. So superiority in memory for things that we still must do. In this study, participants had to recall a list of actions or perform those actions. And the finding was that those who believed that they would have to perform certain actions as opposed to just recalling these actions, were better at remembering what these actions were. And this is due to the idea that we are just have this cognitive process that's set up to help us remember things that we still have to do, versus just recall. Kind of a similar thing here is the Zeigarnik effect, but this gets at memory after interruption. And Zeigarnik was actually a student of Kurt Levine. But anyways, the same type of effect occurs here as we just talked about in the last slide, but this study was with children, and we see that individuals remember unfinished tasks better than completed tasks. And so in this study, children were told to, with some instruction, to make something out of clay. And some of these kids were interrupted before finishing, and then all of the kids were asked to remember the steps they took to make that thing out of clay. And those who were interrupted still remembered the steps. And those who had already completed the task forgot. And this is kind of, we can apply this to adults, right? And especially in academia, in terms of taking an exam. Oftentimes we will remember a lot more before, as we're studying for the exam, than after the exam, right? Because we still in our minds need to use this knowledge, versus after the exam, not quite as much. Obviously, this is dependent on the class. If there are a lot of, if there's a lot of information that you plan on taking and still using from that class, now you're going to be more likely to remember certain things. But if it's a class that you're not as interested in and you don't plan on using in the future, then once you have taken this test, you are likely going to be remembering less of that material than beforehand when you were studying, because now you just don't need to remember as much for your actions. And so we'll get into this more in the next video, where we're going to go over some different phases that we have in volition. So we'll talk about what cognitive processes we're using before we behave, while we're acting towards the goal, and then additionally after we're done behaving, or we're looking back at how we did in trying to accomplish that goal.